For those that don't know, my name is Wade Cook, and my wife and I, Deb, born and raised in Colorado, converted in the Denver church in the late 80s. We've been in the ministry, and we had the blessing of moving to the East region, to Aurora, in 2000. And we led the region, served alongside you until 2016. So some of the 16 years we did Hope, then we went to San Diego, and last year in December, my mom and dad, do we have feedback up here? Is that me? Is it? Okay, maybe it's just me, sorry. The multiple voices are speaking, so gotta go through that. But we moved back, Deb and I, in December to care for my mom and dad. We moved in with them, and I'll tell you, just as an aside, marry a Christian. I just want to lift up Deb for quitting her job, moving away from the home that she loved and the ministry you loved, to move into her husband's high school bedroom to care for her in-laws. Like, that is extraordinary. And so we moved home in December. As you know, and I so appreciate so many of you, my father passed away in February, and the East region just showed up and showed out. The memorial on the 1st, many of you were there and served and helped and picked up and cleaned, and it was extraordinary. And so for all of you, I want to say thank you. For the many texts and cards and plants, you probably got back a heart emoji. What I meant to say, and what Deb meant to say, is that we love you. Your voice, your presence, your impact in our life, your impact on my mom and dad. My mom and dad, this was their region. For so many years, and you guys knew them and supported them. It means so much. And in a time when it is disorienting not to have my father. Any of you who've been the journey of losing your parent, and your cards, your texts, your voicemails that got back very little, if nothing, response, did not betray what was really in our hearts. It's a love and appreciation. So thank you. And we loved San Diego, still love San Diego, love the ministry there, but this is home. And we moved in with mom and dad, have been a part of the North region. We have been going to church and stuff. So just so you know, but really for the longevity of our spiritual life, this is home. This is the region that we plan to get back to, and I'm sorry it's the first time. Thank you, Chris and Megan, for letting me come. And they let me come anytime I want to come, but to actually come and then to preach is really helpful. That's right. So you don't need, to have the pulpit is what I'm saying. So I really appreciate all of that. Mark chapter 5 is where we're going to end up starting out, and I look forward to more times of connection now that we've kind of settled and landed a little bit. The schedule does open up for those lunches and coffees that I'm really, really, really looking forward to reconnecting with you on. As a church, we have been doing a series on wisdom. And wisdom, if you look up dictionary.com, the quality or state of being wise. Knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action. That last word in that definition is so important. Knowing what to do and what to say when. If it's left to just your head, that's a level of your intelligence. Wisdom is those things in action. Is what you say or don't say to your spouse in the heat of that fight. That's wisdom, and it's not. What you say to that coworker when you're the bad coworker. I thought Bruce was going to get through there, like everyone else drives terrible on the road except for myself. I am an amazing driver. And it's all the other crazies out there. Wisdom is what to say or not to say at the right time. And we have been studying out as a church wisdom. And what's important to me in that, amongst many things, is that it comes at such an important time for the church and for you as Christians, that there is an underlying and growing inclination in our society that says you can be a Christian and not have to act like a Christian. Just last week on my way to church, I got a New York Times alert. There's an article that came out about the evangelical movement rejecting modesty and turning toward risque. This is a quote from that A raunchy outsider boobs and booze ethos has elbowed its way into the conservative power class, assisted by the declining influence of traditional religious institutions and shifting media landscape increasingly dominated by the looser standards of online culture. And the article will go on to say that, that in our society, if you look at social media, some of the crazy posts or things that are said or things that are done, and I'm a Christian, are more and more accepted. And so our study on wisdom helps us to dial in on the fact that that is not true. It's not true that you can be a Christian and act in any way you want to act or say anything you want to say. That's a worldly wisdom, and it will end in death. The gospel wisdom, Jesus' wisdom, and what we as Christians have got to grow in is a resolute mindset, a growth and a conviction and reconviction of who you are. We'll talk about this in a second, but if Jesus says you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth, then it's important that you act like it. And not in a mean, aggressive way, but that you are kind. What comes out of your mouth is helpful. That your body language, your grace, your compassion, your forgiveness, what you say or don't say on social media, how you engage politics or not, it matters that you act like a Christian. And that's what we're studying out in wisdom. And over this last month, I know you guys have been in March talking specifically about the likeness of Christ, imitating Christ. And so we're going to look a little bit of Christ and two figures who are good examples of how to imitate Christ in their situation. Mark chapter 5, starting in verse 21. I'm going to go ahead and read a good amount of passage. I was going to say I'm old school, I read the Bible, but I actually have paper. Turn it on or throw your paper. If you're, hold the Bible up. Let's be proud of our paper if you're into it. But whatever's your thing, Mark chapter 5. Starting in verse 21, I'm going to read the whole good section of Scripture here, and then we're going to come back and dissect it together. Mark chapter 5. Starting in verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by that lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she'll be healed and live." And what an amazingly gracious and thoughtful thing that Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and he asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," the disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, I want you to put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that in a second. Trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. And Jairus hears, I don't know if there are worse words a parent can hear. "Your daughter is dead." Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus said to him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand, and he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. What a great story, and familiar maybe to a lot of us. And I want to pull out some things that have stood out to me in my spiritual walk, and I hope will be meaningful to you. Capernaum, probably the most spectacular. Capernaum was the site of many of Jesus' miracles. Maybe none more spectacular than this, the raising of Jairus' daughter. Now, Jairus is on the upper end of the socioeconomic scale. We know from Scripture, first of all, he's named. That means that he's pretty well known. 2, he's a male in a male-dominated society. 3, he's the synagogue ruler, which means he had 2 responsibilities. One was upkeep and responsibility for the maintenance of the temple, and the second was to be sure that what came across the pulpit was theologically sound. So he's a person of great responsibility and great respect. It would be like our Jairus here would be Chris. A responsibility generally of what is said up here, and no one just walks up and says, "Hey, I have a few things to say." There's someone who says, "Hey, here's the preaching schedule." Jairus was that guy. And as well-known and as popular and probably had some means as Jairus was, we see on the other end of the socioeconomic scale, the bleeding woman. If we were reading out of Luke, I would highlight to you, this is one of the several examples where Luke does a masterful job of making both ends of his society and women and the disenfranchised heroes of his story. So Jairus is on the upper end, if you will. The bleeding woman is unnamed, so probably not well known. A woman, no money, as was read. She gave it all out. And she has, because of her condition, by the law of the Bible, by the Old Testament law, is a marginalized person. And we'll read again why she's trembling coming to Jesus. But both of them are equal at the foot of the cross. Both of them are equal by life society, by life situations. It doesn't matter how much money or fame, when your kid is dying, you're desperate. You want that kid to do well. And so Jairus, putting at risk maybe of his own, comes to Jesus. Now, set in the context of Jesus' ministry, it's still a little earlier on. Jesus' popularity is growing with the people, but it's still pretty benign. And so the Jewish elite, the Jewish leadership, they have their eye on this Jesus, but it's not yet gotten to the point where it's going to get. So his popularity and his crowd, there's growing crowds that are following Jesus around. And we pick up at the end of the story, right after the story with the pigs and all that craziness. And on the one side of the lake, the people say, "We don't know what's happened with all these crazy pigs, and you healed this person, and get away from us." Which is a weird reaction that you should have. But anyway, that's the reaction. So Jesus, as a gentleman, gets in the boat and comes back across. We pick up on the story when he lands. And there's a big crowd there. And they're, I don't know, just kind of milling around or moving. Jesus probably had some intention, and this Jairus comes up and says, "Please come with me. Please. My daughter is dying. She doesn't just have the flu. And you're our last hope." And Jesus says, "Okay." And they start going. And then this woman comes up and she touches Jesus' cloak and she's healed. And then what does Jesus say? Who touched me? Now, if you're Jairus and you're on the way, what are you thinking? Let's go. What do you mean touch you? We're all touching you. I'm touching you. Okay, let's go. That's kind of a silly thing to say. What are you doing? And in Luke, we even deals out, but Jesus keeps looking and asking. And the woman, in incredible fear and integrity, exposes herself. I'm the one. Why was there such fear? Because in Leviticus 15, foundational law in the Jewish, this is what was in her mind, what she knew she was supposed to act, and what everyone in the crowd, assuming Jesus as well, knew this is what was supposed to happen. You don't have to turn over Leviticus 15, 25 through 27. If a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not in the time of her period, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her period, 12 years would qualify, all the days of her discharge, she will be unclean. Everything she sits on is unclean, as the uncleanness of her period. Whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the evening. Translation: everyone in the crowd, everyone she touched, inclusive of Jesus, would have to stop immediately what they were doing and at least for a day go towards and perform ritual cleansing. So if you're Jairus, if you're in the crowd, and what was expected at the time is if you were unclean, you alerted to the people, unclean! I want to prepare you to move away. She didn't do any of that. She very quietly is going through the crowd, touching people, just to get to Jesus. And she touches Jesus, and she feels that healing. 12 years, and you're suddenly healthy again. The closest I can come is when at the end of a cold or you have the flu. You know that first day where you're like, oh, I can breathe again. Gosh, I love breathing. That first shower after you've been sick, you're like, wow, I like being healthy. That's as close as I can come. I'm sure she felt this instantaneous energy and health. And then she's going to decide, it would seem, as I would, to sneak out of the crowd. I'm not trying to make a big fuss. And then imagine her heart dropping when the rabbi goes, hey, who touched me? Who broke the law? Who stopped my ministry progress? He didn't say those things, but that was what she heard. Now, what would you have done in that same situation? No one knows. He doesn't know. I'm healed. I don't want to cause a big kerfuffle. So it's incredible in her integrity. And this is one of the questions I want to ask in heaven. Why did you come forward? Knowing that the penalty was your death. Maybe she thought, I'm dead anyway. What do I have to lose? I don't know. But she does raise her hand. And to her surprise, to Jairus' surprise, to everyone's surprise, Jesus says, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. You're good. This is a little glimpse, the first sort of slipping where we see Jesus' divinity. Because up to this point, unclean makes clean unclean. This is the first time that clean makes unclean clean. Jesus is unique. And it's the first time in history that unclean is now clean because of interaction with me. It's a whole nother lesson. But if you have the Spirit You make unclean clean. This is a little bit of what Jesus is saying, in my opinion, that you have responsibility to be the light of the world. You can't just be a member of a tax-exempt organization. You are in part the answer to the uncleanness in this world. Which goes beyond your sharing your faith. Please share your faith. But this is important why you show up. It's important that you pray. It's important that you reach out and say, hey, I have some answers. I didn't invent them. I just know where they are. So we'll get on that too. That's a whole other lesson. But clean makes unclean clean. This was revolutionary. Go in peace. Woohoo! But the story continues, as it always does, the adventure with Jesus. Jairus hears this news that any parent would be broken by. There's a friend of ours, Deb and I know that many of you probably know them. They lead a fellowship in our congregation, our fellowship of churches, lead a church, not here in Colorado. Last summer, he was awoken when the police and the fire department are breaking into his house. And of course, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Someone's breaking in his front door. It's the police and the EMTs, and of course he's down, like, what's going on? Your son called 911 and is attempting suicide. So they go down to his room in the basement. He's unconscious. They try to do some life-saving measures. They put him in the ambulance and they drive to the hospital. My friend, your brother, got in the car. His wife stayed at home with her younger kid, followed the ambulance, and sat in the waiting room for just 45 minutes before the doctor came out and said, "I'm sorry, we lost him. Your son is dead." He said that at that moment, he couldn't breathe. And his first thought was, breathe. Like he had to think, bring in air. Breathe. It was just so shocking, so heavy. This is Jairus' state, my guess, when he hears that news. And Jesus' response to it is what? Do not be afraid. In my mind's eye, I think that he takes Jairus by the chin, look me in the eye. Do not be afraid, just believe. I want to end with that thought, but I want to insert it here. Christian, friend, maybe your kid is not where you want them to be. Maybe your marriage is not where it can be. Maybe your own mental health is struggling. Your finances are tight. You are disoriented. Please hear Jesus saying to you now, don't be afraid. Just believe. Even in death, I am still the Lord. Stick with me. And they do travel after that beautiful encouragement. And I don't know if Jairus was like, okay, yeah, great, or just didn't hear the words at all. We don't know. But Jesus knows the details of your life. And they move on to Jairus' house. And when they arrive at Jairus' house, there's this huge crowd, or a small crowd probably. There's a big crowd with Jesus, but there's a small crowd of people just mourning and wailing. It was Ty Thompson years ago when I was using the scripture. He said, you know where that comes from? Wealthy people in Jesus' day who had the means would hire professional mourners so that there would be a proper atmosphere of sadness. So these are people who really don't know this little girl and are getting a little paycheck. I don't fault them for hustling. But their side hustle is mourning. So they are wailing and crying, and it's so sad. And then Jairus' minister says, "Stop crying, what's all the noise?" "She's just asleep." To which they respond, "What? You idiot? Do you not know the difference between sleep and dead?" That's why they can laugh. But Jesus, not deterred, resolute in mind, knowing who he is and knowing what he's there for, put him out. And he had just a small group, and he raised this little girl from the dead. And there's much rejoicing. It's amazing. This is one of those questions, too, we'll ask. You professional mourners, maybe some became Christians. You're like, whoa, I don't know. She's healed. And the beauty, and one of the things to learn, I think, to see in this is that sometimes waiting for the answer creates a greater miracle. Yeah, that's right. I don't know if miracles are related. I mean, any miracle is a miracle, but do you see how Jairus is patient in Jesus' timing? It wasn't like he was out of control and, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I got distracted, and okay, I'll kind of make up for it. Jesus is always in control. There are only 3 named people in the Old Testament who were dead, who came back to life. And if we discount all of those at Jesus' resurrection, at Jesus' death, remember when he dies, and it says many people came out from the tomb? So if we discount that many, there are only 5 in the New Testament. This little girl is one of them. We're still talking about her 2,500 years later. And I'm saying that the miracle is better or worse. I'm just saying be patient. God's timing is exactly right on. There's no gospel song that said, you may not come when you want him, but he's always right on time. So continue to pray. Continue to wait. Continue to lean in. To continue to show up. Because there is a miracle. He's working it out in ways that are probably outside of our understanding. Whatever you're on your faith journey, keep pressing on. Be resolved. To some of you who've been around for a while, we've been in Bible Talk in the 80s, in the 90s, and you've had that crazy Bible Talk leader. I was probably one of them. Don't just keep showing up. Press in. It's important. You got some stuff on board. You have the Spirit. Truly, as the East is as far from the West, you are forgiven. Utilize that. Pray, smile, help, keep believing. Easter is next week. I'm going to challenge every one of you to invite them to Easter next week. Whoever them may be. The kid who you've said 90 times, his church. The parent, the neighbor, someone who was a part of our fellowship and is working through their stuff. Amen for working through their stuff. Just call and say, hey, you know what? Thinking about you. It's Easter. Everyone's going to church. Would you come? Who knows what God is doing right now? Do not be afraid, just believe. And one little note, and I'll close with this. The very, very last passage there. Verse 43. He gave strict orders, this Jesus, not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. How sensitive of Jesus. Probably the only one in the room who's thinking, she probably is hungry. She's been dead. Someone give her something to eat. Give her a little bite. Probably the only one who thought about it. Who was aware of it? How sweet is that? How kind. Jesus, powerful and smart and God, and yet present. Attentive to detail, not so busy. And that is true in your life. That is true because that's who he is. And you may not know, but he does. Do not be afraid. Just believe. Brothers and sisters, Jesus is coming back. We're 1 week closer than we were last week. We're 1 year closer to hearing those words, good and faithful servant, than we were last year. It could be this Thursday. I was always saying that in San Diego. I don't know if I said it out here. I don't know why. I just feel like when Jesus comes back, it's going to be on a Thursday. So every Thursday, Wednesday night, pray a little more. I don't know. No one told me. But when it happens on a Thursday, I'm going to find every one of you. I'm going to say, could be this Thursday, could be next Thursday, could be in 10 years. But he's coming back. He's working it out. Do not be afraid. Just believe. Thank you.